uses she, her pronouns, and has been executive director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches since 2017. In 2023, she was honored by the United Church of Christ with its Avery D. Ecumenical Award. Beyond ecumenism, and her family, Reverend Parker's passions are stories, show tunes, and justice. She has served as a local church pastor in McFarland, Wisconsin, and YWCA executive in Rock County, Wisconsin. Reverend Parker has been a panelist and keynote speaker for presentations on pandemic ministry, ecumenism, and church vitality, and biblical justice. In addition to editing and co-authoring study action guides on faith and gun violence, Jesus and justice in public, and immigration, becoming welcoming communities, she contributed to the book, There's a Woman in the Pulpit. She earned her Master of Divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary and is pursuing a Doctor of Ministry in Prophetic Leadership at Iliff School of Theology. What a privilege it is to have you here this morning. Wow. Please.
Good morning, friends. I bring you greetings from the 21-member traditions of the Wisconsin Council of Churches. That's about 2,000 congregations around the state. Can't bring them all with me every time, so just on behalf of everybody, hello. I'm here today thanks to God and my ancestors, and my teachers and my neighbors. I have to give honor especially to Jim Bear Jacobs and Bill Quackenbush and Ada Deer, who have been generous and let me listen and learn, and acknowledge those who share and sacrifice and struggled, whose stories are now intertwined with mine. The land and those who inhabit it with me, my growing neighbors with short and long lives, and the soils and the stones and the waters that have seen eons. Some years ago, I read a book, Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko, a Laguna Puebla woman. In that novel, she writes, "I will tell you something about stories. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They're all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. You don't have anything if you don't have the stories." First Nations kin remind us that the land and the people are one. You were born on the land and you are laid to rest in the land. Body and blood inseparable. To know the people, you need to know the land. To know the land, you have to know the people. If you're wounding one, you're wounding the other. So severing one from the other is this unimaginable trespass, creating bodily injury, these deep soul wounds, generational cuts. These stories are not easy or simple stories to tell. We need to learn about our own past, our ancestors' past, our collective history, what the government's done in our name, what the church has done in God's name. That's one kind of truth to teach. And then here's another kind of truth to teach. We were not made for weeping or war or calamity, but we've gotten very good at inflicting it on one another. One side against the other and assuming that's just got to be the state of things. But we can do better. We cannot bless our descendants, all of our relations, without deconstructing what comes between us. The road of reconciliation requires that we take time to know. We have to learn the truth and let it bring us together instead of separate us. So, stories. A little bit of a history lesson. You may know this. Apologies if you do. It's going to be a recap. What do we know of the relationships between the white settlers and the First Nations and the land and the culture? 1452, Pope Nicholas V, head of the Western Church, issues a decree that grants the Portuguese king powers to search out and conquer all pagans, enslave them, and appropriate their land and goods. 1493, Pope Alexander VI adds a new teaching. Any land that's not inhabited by Christians is available to be discovered and claimed and exploited. This is an important backdrop. My 8th great-grandmother, great, had the French surname that meant of the abbey. She was an orphan. Jacqueline of the Abbey was born in 1651. That's how many greats gets you, 1651. And she arrived in Quebec in 1668, marrying at the age of 17. Now, how does an orphan dropped off at the Abbey, a girl with nothing, make it to this young colony, and why? Advisors to King Louis XIV knew that you cannot sustain a colony with soldiers and fur traders and priests. What's missing? Women. Not enough women were coming voluntarily. So the king's advisor said, you need to sponsor hardy women to come across the sea. Women who can be fit for the hard work of colonizing. When they arrived, they were to marry. They could pick the man they wanted to marry. This was progressive. Oh my goodness. They could pick the man they wanted to marry, and if they stayed married for a year, the couple received a land grant. Whose land? Is it the king's land? Is it the couple's land? The Huron-Wendat Nation. Is the land even an it to be divided and sold and given away? Or is the land one with whom we are to be in relationship? As it turned out, Jacqueline married a soldier. So, soldiers go out on night raids. So Jacqueline is at home tending the land and their 8 children. What's the calculus of sleeping children and safety? Whose children are safe that night? And I got to say this, in a time of war, when people are contending for land and survival and parents are weeping, all of the children deserve to live. Now, land grants existed all over this continent. They're part of the heritage of a lot of people in the Midwestern US. So when I say this, I'm not trying to instill guilt or shame, but the truth matters. Different shades of this story exist in different places. Power moves people. Jacqueline wasn't like, yeah, I feel like I'm gonna move to the new colony today. The king said so. Power moves people, and community and culture suffer for it. More history. 300 years after Pope Alexander VI issued that decree, that church doctrine became the US legal basis for westward expansion. We now refer to this complex of religious and legal belief and practice as the doctrine of discovery. It's still part of US and international law. Last time it was cited was 2005 by Ruth Bader Ginsburg in a case against the Oneida Nation. This is not old stuff. Church and state are not as separate as we think. In 1830, the doctrine of discovery led to the Indian Removal Act, which led to the forced removal of the Ho-Chunk. We heard that story, right? Within the borders of modern-day Wisconsin are 11 federally recognized Indian nations. The 12th, Brothertown, became citizens of the US in 1839 in order to avoid one more in a series of forced removals. If we become US citizens, will you stop moving us? Okay? A whole bunch of consequences follow. These are a fraction of the stories we can tell. This is a fraction of what this history has done to these relationships. If you sit down in relationship with Indigenous peoples today, and by the way, 40% of Americans do not believe there are Indigenous people alive today. If you sit down with Indigenous kin, you will hear about the impact of boarding schools and children and language and culture and health, and how empty, meaningless land acknowledgements disappoint and frustrate when we continue on the same way we did before. There's a story from my tradition in which the teacher instructs, if you remember that your sibling has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled, make things right with your sibling before trying to kiss up to God. Restorative action means actually trying to make things right with our kin. Whose voices have been excluded and ignored, and how can we make space for them to live in relationship, not speaking at or about, but with one another? Now, if we're looking for acts of repair, I have lots of examples. I have slides full of examples, but all of those are its. If there's something broken between us and our sibling, then we don't need to stay where we are and pretend that an it is going to fix something. An it can't make things better. We need to start by going ourselves to show our willingness to listen. This is how we fight off illness and death, by hearing one another's stories. This is how a new creation comes.